everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful mosaic bracelet. It is high in difficulty, so I do recommend watching the entire video throughout before attempting this one. I wanted to share the inspiration for this bracelet and also the pattern we're going to be following, so feel free to look into the description for more information on this. What you'll need for this tutorial are 5x5mm Tila beads, 3mm Miyuki bugle beads, 15O seed beads, and 3mm bicones. You'll also need your choice of beading thread, about 30 feet. I use FireLine. 2 beading needles. I use 11O for this project. And of course your choice of clasp. Go ahead and measure out 15 feet of FireLine. If you prefer to work in smaller pieces, go ahead and thread that through. If you are going to work with this larger piece, I recommend threading it through your needle quite far, just so you're working with less overall string. And now we're ready to begin the grid of our bracelet. So first I'm going to begin with 4 bugle beads. Alright, there they are on my needle. What we're going to do now is string those beads down through until we get to the end of our thread. Now you do want to leave about a 6-inch tail before we make it to this next part, which is going through the beads once again from the bottom. And the reason we leave this tail is so that we can tie the beads or tie it at the end and hide it. So I'm going to do 2 knots to secure my thread. And then I'm actually going to attach a needle to that end, that smaller piece of thread, and run it through the first square that we made to hide it better. And this is really good to really ensure that our bracelet doesn't become unraveled over time. You can go ahead and snip that end off. So I had to make a second one because I broke the first one. This next part, we're going to pick up a seed bead and go through our next bugle bead just to add a seed bead to each corner, but also we're going to be expanding our bracelet to the right. So we're going to grab a bugle bead and go through the bugle bead. Our string is already gone through, but in the opposite direction, because that's going to attach the next bugle bead to the right pretty flush, which is essentially the start of our next square. Now we're going to grab another seed bead and go through the bugle bead at the top. Now something else that needs to be considered is we're also going to be expanding the bracelet upwards. So you're going to grab another tube and do very similar to the one you did to the right. Go through the opposite end so that we can secure a tube bead in the upwards direction. Making sure it's flush in the process. Alright, so now we can attach our next seed bead. Go ahead and pick one up and go through the left part of the square. And one more seed bead to complete our very first square on this grid. Alright, now it's time to continue onto our grid and adding a second square. So what we're going to do is make sure our square is positioned so that there's an extra bugle bead to the right and one to the top. And we're going to go ahead and start working towards the right. So I pulled my needle through. I made a mistake here. You don't want to go through that top seed bead. You actually just want to go through the bugle bead so that you can go down the next bugle bead. And that kind of hides the thread a little bit better. And since we've already added the first side of our square, we only need to grab 3 bugle beads. Once you have them on your needle, you're going to go down the same bugle bead again, and as you can see, we've got a second square on our grid. We're not done though. We're going to have to add the corner seed beads and also the additional bugle beads that need to go towards the right and in the upwards direction. Alright, now it's time to add the final square to our row. As this grid is a 3 per row style, I wanted to note that because this is the rightmost square, I will not be adding a secondary bugle bead to the right of my square. Alright, so now it's time to start working upwards. So I'm going to work my needle through the current square I'm in so that I go through the most top bugle bead on the square that I'm on. So that secondary bugle bead that was added beforehand. Alright, now it's time to add our 4th square to our grid. We're going to need 3 bugle beads because our bottom one's already covered. Go through that bottom bugle bead And there's our square. So we can go ahead and start adding our seed beads and extra bugle beads. So very similar to that first row we did, we're going to add an additional bugle bead towards the top. But in this time, since we're working in the leftwards direction, we're going to add an extra bugle bead to the left of our square and continue that way. Now you may notice as you're working your way towards the left side of the square and you begin the 5th square, you only need to add 2 more bugle beads to complete it. So as your thread is going towards the upwards direction, grab your 2 bugle beads and you're going to go through the bottom bugle bead. Make sure before you add any more seed beads to the corners that you complete this square with your thread. Alright, so that's our second row done. For a 6-inch bracelet, I do about 23 rows. And I wanted to show a moment where I made a mistake in that I forgot to add an upper bugle bead to one of my squares. And when that happens, you can just add all 4 bugle beads, or all 3 at that point. You'll just need to make sure you attach it to the rest of the grid properly. So this is where I'd say, or this is what I'd say makes this bracelet a little more harder, as there's lots of room for error and you kind of need to have the intuition to make improved decisions. So here I am at row 22. I'm about to add my final row to this bracelet. Whenever you're ready to add your final row, make sure that you do not add an upper bugle bead to these squares, because that's the end of your bracelet. Alright, and now to finish the grid of our bracelet, we're going to run the thread through our square, very similar to the first step that we did on this tutorial, so that we can hide the end and make it far less easy to unravel, nearly impossible. So to prepare for the next part of this tutorial, we need to attach more thread to our bracelet. The easiest way to do that is to go down, probably a quarter of your bracelet and just thread your thread in zigzag fashion through the grid. This will lock it in place if you zigzag enough. The end goal of this part is to get your thread through the very leftmost or rightmost upper seed bead so that we can begin adding our bicones and tilas to the bracelet. So when you're in that upper seed bead, you're going to grab a bicone, a seed bead, and another bicone, and you're going to go through the vertical opposite seed bead in an opposite direction. You'll pull that through, and then you're going to go up through the bugle bead through the next seed bead, For Tilas, you want to make sure that you're through the upper bugle bead of the square your Tila is going to sit on. So once you're through that, go through one of the Tila's holes and go through the bottom bugle bead of that square, not through any seed beads for Tilas. You can pull that through and make sure the Tila is flush to the square so that you can go up through the other side of the Tila and tighten it all up by going through that upper bugle bead once more. So for the bicones, you go through all the seed beads. For Tilas, or these, you'll notice I add some check squares to mine. You're going to just go through the upper and lower bugle beads. So you may notice as you're filling in your grid that you have forgotten to put a seed bead in some areas. If that's the case, if you're going to add bicones to this square, you have to have the seed beads on to finish it. If it's a Tila, you can add your Tila first and then add the seed bead. So because this is a square with a Tila on it, I actually add my Tila first, then I go back around and fill in that missing seed bead. So here she is, almost done, all the way filled in. The final step now is we've got to add our clasp. So at this point, what you want to do is make your way towards the middle square's upper seed beads. So I'm pointing to it right now. That's where we're going to add our clasp. At this point, it's easiest to kind of work backwards on our grid because it's easier to see where our needle's going. So go ahead and work your needle through until you get to either the right or left upper seed bead of that middle square. So once your thread is through that seed bead, you want to grab a bugle bead and a seed bead. Then you'll get your clasp and you're going to go through it. Be careful not to have your clasp go over the beads, because what you'll do is now you're going to go through the seed bead once more, as if like kind of going around in a circle, and go through the seed bead again to kind of secure that toggle to the seed bead, or whichever clasp you decide to use to the seed bead. Then you're going to grab another bugle bead and you're going to go to the opposite upper seed bead of that middle square. And what I do is I actually run the rest of my thread all the way through until the other end of the bracelet to secure that side of the toggle. This takes quite a long time, but it really makes sure that it stays in place. So once you've made it to the other side and up through that middle upper seed bead, you can repeat the steps for the other side of your toggle or your clasp, adding your bugle, your seed bead, adding your clasp, and then going through it a couple times to secure it, adding an additional bugle bead and going through that opposite other upper seed bead. Wow. And to finish this off now, I go through the grid a little bit, not a whole bunch this time around, but just enough that I feel that my thread is secure and it won't unravel even if I pull at the toggles. And then I'll snip it off and my bracelet's done. Here's the final piece. I really hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and find me in other areas of the internet. I'll see you next time.